Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Care Connection, the free live webinar, the second Thursday of each month. And we also have special editions as well. I want to thank our guest speaker today. It's Dr. Robin Boniface. Her topic today is going to be strategies to reduce peer-to-peer bullying and other antagonistic behaviors among older adults. Dr. Boniface is an associate professor and associate director in curriculum and instruction at the Arizona State University School of Social Work. She has over 15 years experience working with elders and their families in both long-term care and inpatient psychiatric settings. Her current projects examine elder social justice issues such as resident-to-resident aggression in nursing homes, bullying among older adults, and other challenges to social relationships in senior care organizations. She is the author of Bullying Among Older Adults, How to Recognize and Address an Unseen Epidemic, available through Health Professions Press. She is a John A. Hartford Faculty Scholar in Geriatric Social Work. She is a consulting editor for Health and Social Work and the Journal of Gerontological Social Work, and serves on the board of directors for the Arizona chapter of the National Association for Social Workers. Please begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. I'm just making sure that you can hear me.
We hear you fine. I just want to say, and I'm sorry, I want to let everyone know that the presentation is going to be in listen-only mode. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. On the right-hand side, you'll see under questions, you could type them in. I apologize, I didn't give that a moment ago, but we could hear you, and please begin. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much, and welcome to everyone. I'm delighted to be able to spend time with you today. So as you know, we're here to talk about strategies to reduce peer-to-peer bullying and other antagonistic behaviors among older adults. So an overview of our time together today. I need to move something here on my desktop here. There we go. Is first of all the definitions and examples of bullying behaviors, so that we all know what we're talking about. Then the characteristics of bullying among older adults. And then the highlight of the presentation is to review some of the promising interventions to minimize bullying behaviors. So first of all, I'd like people to be aware that really minimal research has been completed on bullying among older adults. So the information that I'm going to share with you is based on 3 sources of information. I think it's very important that you know where the information is coming from. So it's from my research, which took place in assisted living, 2 low-income, large low-income facilities in a metropolitan city. And then practice experience with individuals and organizations impacted by senior bullying, and not just my practice experience, but the practice experience of several different providers across the country. And then there's a wealth of literature on bullying among other population groups that can really inform our work with older adults. So it's the combination of those 3 sources of information that I'm sharing with you today. So just a question for you to think about. Who here has ever been bullied? Has that been something in your experience? Do you know someone who has been bullied? Perhaps a sibling, perhaps one of your children. And when I pose this to in-person audiences, typically 20% or so of people in the audience raise their hand as having been bullied in the past. And as we talk and share that, for most people it occurred during their childhood as part of their school experiences. And what I've learned in my research is that bullying really appears to occur across the lifespan. It's not something that just occurs in grade school or junior high. It occurs in college, it occurs in the workplace, it occurs in prisons, and then it goes on to occur in older adult settings as well. So it's a lifelong phenomenon that seems to be characteristic of when people get together for long periods of time, that behavior comes out. So definition of bullying is what I want to present next. So it's attentional, repetitive, aggressive behavior that involves an imbalance of power or strength. So it involves one person sort of being domineering or being over other people. Now, what we've noticed among older adults is that it doesn't necessarily need to be repetitive for it to have a negative impact. There's certainly been occasions where just one episode has had a detrimental effect on someone. And the example that I like to share is somebody who had retired, moved back to their hometown, and was so looking forward to getting together with people who she may have known as a younger person. And she thought, what better place to do that than the local senior center. So she went to the senior center and tried to join into an activity they were having, and it was met with, oh, you can't sit there, that seat's saved. Well, no, you can't sit there, that seat's saved. And virtually all the seats were saved. And it wasn't really that the seats were saved, it's just that people did not want to welcome her to the group. And so she felt just so unwelcome that she never went back to the senior center. Because of that one episode where she was excluded from the group, she completely lost that opportunity to engage at the senior center. So that's one episode, very negative impact. Relational aggression is something we see among older adults very commonly. It's non-physical aggression intended to damage relationships and connections. So the woman who was excluded from groups at the senior center, that's an example of relational aggression. No one hit her or kicked her or anything like that. They just like, no, you can't be part of us. So that's very common. When I talk about bullying, I'm talking about there's three different types: verbal, physical, and the antisocial or relationship-centered. So verbal is just like it sounds. It's using the voice to call people names, to tease them, to make threats, or pointed jokes that target a specific individual. Physical is the pushing, hitting, destroying property, stealing, and antisocial, which is we see very commonly, is shunning and excluding, gossiping, spreading rumors, and then negative nonverbal language, so mimicking someone's, like if they walk with a limp or perhaps have a tic or something, or using offensive gestures. So just so we know what I'm referring to. So here's some examples from my research of what participants said in talking about, here's what they experienced. So there's one that tries to be the #1 tough guy. He comes up to me and says, one of these days I'm going to smack you with a hammer. So that's a verbal threat. And we don't know if the other person had a hammer or anything like that, but just that threat was very frightening to the person. And he went around every day, is this the day that he's going to hit me with a hammer? The other one is he calls me fatso. He says, hey, fatso. Then as he goes down the hall, he would make oinking noises as he went to the elevator. So this was from a woman with large body size who was constantly ridiculed about her weight, to the point that people, one person in particular, would make noises like a pig as she walked by, and I'm exposed to that on a daily basis. And when you think about this occurring in assisted living, it's so problematic, and it's difficult for children to be bullied in school, but at least they get to go home at the end of the day and get some break from that. And people in assisted living are exposed to this all the time, so they can't escape, and that makes it even more challenging. Okay, so who engages in this type of behavior? Who treats people like this? So some of the common characteristics are people who are really, they really seek to control other people, and they find it, they feel reinforced by being powerful, by being in control, by making others feel threatened, or by observing conflict, causing and observing conflict between other people. Those are the kinds of things that make them tick and make them feel like, they've got things going for them when they're able to make people feel that way. They also have difficulty tolerating individual differences. So if you think about the average person maybe being able to tolerate a certain amount of difference, somebody who's a bully is maybe able to tolerate 20% of that. So really react more strongly to people who they see as different, as falling outside of what they feel is acceptable in terms of behavior. They also tend to lack empathy. So they have a harder time understanding and recognizing how people feel. And they have few positive social relationships. And always when I share that in in-person audience, people will say, well, Dr. Boniface, why are you here telling us that people who bully have no friends? Of course they have no friends. They're a bully. And what we don't know here is which comes first. Do they have no friends because they're bully other people, or do they have no friends and therefore they figure, why be nice? Nobody likes me anyway. So you don't know the order of these things. And then what we've noticed for older people specifically who bully others is that it seems to be tied with loss. So loss of valued roles, loss of social identity, loss of a sense of belonging. For example, if they've had to leave their home, their neighborhood of many years to move into assisted living or move into some other type of senior housing, that's a big a loss and hard to figure out, how do I fit in here? So some people, their bullying behavior towards others may actually be because they feel so powerless. They're trying to figure out some way to feel like they're in control of something. So those negative behaviors that we see may actually be them trying to reach some sort of equilibrium where they just can't really figure out any other way to be in control, but they can do it through controlling others. So thinking about that can help us not to vilify the bully, but to have empathy towards him or her. And also points the way to possible interventions, because if we can help them to identify healthy ways to be in control, that can help reduce the some of the negative behaviors. So these are some quotes from my research participants just sharing what contributed their negative behaviors towards others. I have problems accepting their problems. That's one of the things that's the hardest to deal with. So that's an example of that, limited tolerance. This is, again, in assisted living, and this person just saw everybody as a walking bed of problems, and that was just very, very hard for her to deal with. They go 2 generations back from me and don't know what they're talking about. So again, this is in these facilities, there was older adults and then younger people with disability, and they just didn't see eye to eye, and that led to some difficulties and antagonistic behavior. For me, the hardest part has been living with people I've never associated with in my life. So again, the difficulty tolerating folks that are just fall outside what the person is comfortable dealing with. Let me explain this slide. So we were able to, everyone in the sample came forward as experiencing bullying by their peers, but some of them were just straight victims or targets of bullying, and others were bullied but also bullied in return. So we had victims and we had bully victims, and we were able to divide the sample between those and look at what are the differences between those two types of people. So we looked at differences in cognitive status, depression, self-esteem, and the experience of lifetime trauma. And the only difference that was statistically significant was people who bullied reported less lifetime trauma, which was a surprising result for me. And it was a difference, an average difference of 5 incidences across their lifespan, and 8 for people who didn't bully. So, I mean, it was pretty significant. And I don't know what that means. My research didn't look into that. It's something I'd like to explore further. But I wonder if it actually ties into that lacking empathy. Because if you think about having less adversity in your life, it's more difficulty to see how others might feel in response to adversity, and you just have less insight into how others might be feeling. I'd like to explore that. Or it could be something much more simpler than that, where people who bully don't recall that they've had trauma. So I don't know what's going on there, but that's an interesting finding. Thinking about who is it that gets bullies, who's the target of this in later life. And so we don't know as much about people who are targeted as we do about people who engage in bullying behavior. So obviously they have a harder time defending themselves. And I don't mean to imply that they cause the bullying. They don't, but there's just something about their personality, their way of engaging with life that makes it easy for people to pick on them. And because of that, they do experience a sense of powerlessness because they don't, why is everybody picking on me, from that old song. And the experiences are unpredictable. So it's very disempowering and frightening. We see what we call passive targets, which tend to be more highly emotional people in general. They have a hard time reading the social environment. We typically see them as shy and insecure. They tend to be more anxious. Just a minute. Can you pull my door shut, please? Sorry, I forgot to shut my office door before I started in this. So they may experience anxiety, and if dementia is present, it's quite early stages. And then I think one of the things that's most concerning and most important for us to be aware of, because people who bully tend to have a low tolerance for difference, folks who are racially or ethnically different from the overall population of the organization, or who have different spiritual beliefs, people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, they can be perceived as different, and because of that, be targeted by people who bully. So also see like the only person who uses a walker or uses a wheelchair, those types of things. So anything that is a bit different from the general population of the organization can put somebody into the role of target. And there's also provocative targets who, in being more shy and insecure, tend to be a little bit more outgoing and annoying or irritating to other people. And just that behavior may egg on bullies who don't tolerate that type of thing. And if dementia is present, it's a little bit more advanced. And not to confuse bullying behavior with dementia-related behavior. Those are two very different things, where dementia-related behavior that was striking out and those sorts of things is more around cognitive deficit and not being able to understand what's going on and feeling threatened and then acting out in self-protection. Whereas with bullying, it's about control and being in charge. Very different motivations. That's important to keep in mind. Sometimes people think, well, there's so many other problems that older adults can experience. Who really cares about bullying when we have all these other things, suicidal ideation and opioid addiction and all those things? These are, in my research, and then my colleagues, what they report, the most common reactions to being bullied: anger, annoyance, frustration, fearfulness, anxiety, retaliating, actually bullying back, and then feeling this horrible sense of self-loathing because of it, self-isolation, and exacerbation of existing mental health conditions. And if you think about them constantly feeling angry, I mean, that is not good for one's physical health. Constantly feeling in a state of fearfulness and anxiety is not good for one's health either. And then self-isolation. I mean, there's so much research about the negative impacts of self-isolation and loneliness. And just being in these states can lead to substance abuse, significant health problems, suicidal ideation. So it can be a precursor of more serious problems. So we want to take bullying seriously and take steps to address it. These are just some examples of Pete talking about what it was like to experience bullying or the antagonistic behaviors from others. I won't read all of these. Just to point out the last one. I just have to dodge him because he will altercate me. I have to try and avoid being harangued. If he hits me and I fall, I'll break a bone. And this was from a woman who another person in the facility would bump into her purposely quite often. Like if he saw her walking down the hall, he would position himself to be able to bump her. And that was a constant source of worry for her, feeling that this was going to be the day that she would actually lose her balance and fall and break her hip. And we know how detrimental a hip fracture can be for an older adult. And just imagine constantly being fearful of this. That was her life. This slide, let me share this with you because this is different. This is important, as interesting as well. So we were able to divide the sample, and this is people who had been bullied again. Some are very, very distressed about it, and others were just like, well, yeah, it's a problem. I don't really like it, but it's just, water off a duck's back. They weren't as impacted by the behavior as others. even though they were experiencing the same types of incidents at the same level. So we wanted to see what might be the differences between these two groups, and same measures on cognitive status, depression, self-esteem, and lifetime trauma. And the differences here is the people who were very, very distressed by the episodes scored much higher in terms of their depression symptoms, and much lower on their self-esteem. So that is very important. And again, this is cross-sectional research. So we don't know which comes first. We don't know if being bullied contributes to depressive symptoms and low self-esteem, or being depressed, having low self-esteem positions you to a target. And my suspicion is that it's probably elements of both. So that's sort of the introduction to the characteristics of bullying and why it may happen and its impact on. So I want to switch now and talk about, I think the most important part, that why people are here is what can we do about this in our organizations. And just to set the stage here, Maslow's hierarchy, I think many of you are maybe familiar with that, and if not, it's a way of categorizing human needs. And what Maslow said is that we have these 5 types of human needs, and we have to meet our physiological needs before we can meet our safety needs, before we can meet our love and beyond belonging needs, before we can meet our esteem needs. So physiological is just, air, water, food, and safety is, having a roof over our head and a place where we can hang our hat. And the idea is that we need to have food to eat before we can really focus on, I need to be accepted by my peers and work on my self-esteem. I mean, there's levels to this. And why I present this, if we think about people who bully, they're trying to meet a need to be in control, to be in charge. So they're at the level of the love and belonging needs and esteem needs. So as we think about intervention, if we can address those types of needs, that may help reduce bullying behaviors. Whereas if we think about people who are the targets of bullying, they're more at like the safety level or possibly at the love and belonging level. So it's a different type of need that we need to help them with. And thinking about that, it can be ways to come up with interventions. So typically when we're having bullying occurring in our organization, or someone we love is experiencing bullying, we want to fix the bully. And if that person could just stop bullying, everything would be good. But the problem is really broader than that. So I'd like to encourage you to think about minimizing bullying really requires intervention at multiple levels. The bully is just one of them. The actual most important level is the organizational level. So what are you doing within your facility, within your apartment community, or whatever it is, to make it so bullying is not an option? And then, of course, we need to intervene at the victim or target level as well. So we talk about organizational level interventions first. And when we think about changing the culture of our organization to make it so bullying isn't so easy, the idea is to strive to create a caring community for both people who live there and the people who work there. So caring, that's just exhibiting concern and empathy for others. And by empathy, I just mean the ability to recognize and share feelings that another may be experiencing. And empathy, being able to see and understand and appreciate how others feel, is really the key to reducing bullying. So I'm going to share 4 interventions that my colleagues across the country are using. One is civility training. The other is Upstander training, resident recognition programs, or 10 recognition, whatever you call the people that you work with, and pro-social activities. And the nice thing about these interventions is they can be done by anyone. It doesn't require a mental health professional to do. So with civility training, and I learned about this from Benson, who runs a continuing care retirement community, I believe out of Wisconsin. And what this is about is just helping the tenant and the community in general tie into the tenets of civility and really implement that and include them as part of just day-to-day interaction, really trying to have the community. The most important thing about the community is being civil and just infusing things with that. And the way he introduces this intervention is half the battle, so to speak. Because what I've found in trying to help others do anti-bullying related interventions is that they'll come up with some great intervention, invite people to come, and then the people who really need to be there don't show up. So Diana has developed a way to prevent that. So what she does is she has posters that are made up that highlight these 9 tenets of civility. And about 8 or 9 weeks out, before she's planned her big event, which I'll talk about in a bit, she posts a new poster each week without any fanfare, without any introduction, that just shows up around the facility. There'll be, avoid gossip or be inclusive or whatever. And it stimulates a lot of interest and speculation among the tenants. And they'll come to her and like, wow, I was in the ladies' room and on the back of the door, there's this big sign that said avoid gossip. What's that about? And she won't tell them. She'll say, well, when December, 8th rolls around, you'll see. And so she keeps doing that, changing out the posters, and there's just all this hype around it. And what happens is that when it's time for the event, everybody shows up because they're curious about what these posters are all about. And at the event itself, she introduces the idea of a civil community and what is it like to live in a civil community. And there's a discussion about that, and people talk about what's important to them, and they talk about what's important in our community to have a civil community. And the upshot is then they identify the things that are important to them. They capture it, they document it on paper. Here's what we want our community to be like. Here's the things that we want to endorse and foster. And then they all sign a pact that I agree to live by the tenets of civility. And it doesn't end with that, but it's first step in an ongoing process where they meet regularly, administration and tenants, to talk about, hey, how are things going in our community? What challenges are we experiencing to civility this week or this month or however often that you're meeting? And so they're constantly brainstorming and addressing issues and coming up with ways to assure that the environment is civil. And I think the key there is it's not meetings to talk about who was a problem or who violated civility. It's framed around what were the challenges to civility. So it's a little bit more strength-based planning. And it's worked very well for her facility to the extent that the tenants have gone beyond that to develop more siblings. So they started like a neighborhood watch program where they have little signs that they hang on their door before they go to bed. And then the next morning, someone goes around or a team goes around and checks who still and then they bring it back in when they get up in the morning. So at 10 o'clock, they go around and check, and if anyone still has their sign on the door, it's a clue that there may be something wrong, and so they check on that person. And so that's something that the tenants develop themselves. And they also develop sort of a bargaining thing where they sign up to share, like if somebody needs a ride to the doctor, well, I'll give you a ride to the doctor if you can mend this tear in my dress. So they share tasks like that. And both of those things, the neighborhood watch and the barter system, have just fostered more civility and more community engagement. So it's been just from a relatively simple event and regular meetings to talk about issues has really developed in something that's really helped to foster a sense of community. So again, easy to do. Upstander training is a bit different, and it's based on the idea of, you may have heard of bystander training. It's often what they do in the school, and my colleague Eleanor Barbera calls it upstander training, the idea helping people to stand up to bullies. So it's training residents how to intervene. If you see bullying occurring, what do you do without putting yourself at risk? So the idea, if you don't do anything, that just gives the bully permission to continue. So the training involves, what's the definition of bullying, presents the cycle of bullying, which I'll show next. They do role play to practice. They learn intervention techniques, and they practice those as well. So it's not just a lecture. There's actual practicing of the behaviors. So this is the cycle of bullying that she teaches. And what's really important about this cycle, if you see step 3 and step 5 are the bystander roles. There's 2 places in the cycle that the bystander can disrupt the cycle. So she shows them, where their power is. And the types of interventions she teaches them, bystander interventions, very simple. So they're not going in and, having a mental health session with people, but maybe see 2 people that are engaged in, an altercation, but to step up and just say, hey, it looks like this is some stressful thing going on. How about one of you come and have some coffee? Or how about we go and have some coffee together? Let's go for a walk together. Hey, things are getting pretty tense. So it's about just redirecting the behavior, those kinds of things, very simple to do. The third one here is resident recognition programs. And this is also out of, this is from Eleanor Barbera, who's in New York City. And the idea is, so often when we're trying to minimize bullying behaviors, which is a good thing, we just focus on that, minimizing bullying behaviors. But on the flip side, if we can increase positive behaviors, that just potentiates our work. So resident recognition programs are designed to do that, to increase the positive behaviors. So it involves, again, all of these involve the tenants and residents in the planning. So having them identify what kind of behaviors, how do we want to treat each other here? What's important to us? What do we want to recognize? And in the building she was working with, they identified caring and welcoming and upstanding and encouraging, helping and supporting. But it could be anything, whatever's important to the tenants that you are working with. And the idea is then you have a care squad or a team of people whose job it is to watch for those types of behaviors. And when they see them occurring, to take note of them. And once a month, there's an award ceremony for everyone who was caught engaging in a caring behavior. So there's public recognition, and they get some type of little award, whether it's a little certificate or a pin or just whatever. It's not any big thing, but it's the public recognition. So it would be, we want to recognize Jose Sanchez, who welcomed Paul Adkins to the facility on the day he moved in. He went up to him, introduced himself, shook hands, said, "I'm glad you're here, great job, Jose," that kind of thing. And what's happened with these ceremonies is they've got to be very, very popular. Everybody comes, including the people who tend to bully. And what's nice is they see another way to gain attention, another way to be in control. Wow, I can do, I don't necessarily need to yell at everybody I see. I can do these other things. So it's provide good models for people who may not have repertoire of kind behaviors. So it's had that impact as well. Then the last one here is pro-social activities, again from Eleanor Barbera out of New York City. They have a very busy in New York, so they always have time to come up with these inventions. So this one is based on the idea that people who are busy doing good don't have time to bully. Often what I see in my work and what others have shared with me is the idea that sometimes what happens is there'll be these welcoming committees, and you can't see me, but I'm in air quotes around welcoming committees because they're not really welcoming. What it is typically it'll be a group of older women who are sitting in the lobby of the assisted living facility and spending a good part of the day there, having a running commentary, negative commentary about everyone who passes. And some people find that so terribly offensive that they actually go out the back door and through the alley to avoid the welcoming committee. So if you imagine engaging those women in something else that would occupy their time, that's going to minimize that kind of thing. Now there is a research base to pro-social activities where it's associated with increased self-esteem and reduced symptoms of depression. And if you remember the slide I showed earlier with my numbers and the chart, the victims of bullying have lower self-esteem and higher depression. So this is an activity that's helpful for them as well. So what it is in community engagement in an activity that's designed to help others. Typically, it's outside the community, the assisted living or senior housing community, and something, within the broader neighborhood. But it could be, in your large facilities, it could be something there as well, perhaps helping another floor or whatever. And these are just some examples of what Eleanor's clients did. They were involved in knitting hats for premature babies. They raised money for charity within bake sales and different things like that. They were involved in political campaigns. But the idea is that you're very busy, engaged in something that's interesting to the group and that helps others. So that's another way. Here's some ideas just about working with the bullies themselves, and remembering that, they may be in pain, they may be feeling loss, and they do need an outlet to vent their frustrations. And so providing that outlet. So rather than criticizing the person of color that they have very low tolerance for, if they can come and talk with you or somebody else in the organization about how difficult it is for them, that can be helpful. And I've made deals with folks, rather than telling Mr. Smith to go back to Africa or whatever, if you could come and talk with me about the frustrations you're having about living here, that would be a better way. Can we make that agreement? And that's been really helpful, because some people just have not lived with a diverse population, and that frustration for them is real, whether we approve of it or not, if that makes sense. So working with them to identify other ways that they can feel in control, helping them to learn how to communicate positively, helping them to develop empathy, to expand their social network and address feelings of loss. And of course, this is all very easy for me to say, not as easy to do, but ideas around, designing interventions around those types of things. And then for people who are bullied, whatever you can do to bolster their self-esteem, treat any underlying depression, develop their skills so they're not putting themselves at such risk. So they're not seen as somebody who's easy to pick on. So how they can stand up for their rights. Typically people who are bullied feel very angry, addressing feelings of anger and helping them to communicate directly. And if we think about somebody who maybe for 85 years who has not stood up for themselves, we're not going to expect huge miracles at this stage in life. But if they can just get to the point of coming to management and report, that is something significant. So often they suffer in silence because they fear retaliation. So even if they just have the skills to come to you and say, can you please help me? I mean, that's a step in the right direction. Here's some support, some resources that the organization wanted to share with you. I'm sure you can learn more about those. And then I think that 1 minute over in terms of the time for questions and discussion. So I'm looking forward to hear your voices.
So yes, thank you for
such.
Yes, thank you for such excellent presentation. We'll be taking questions right now. And so our first question is, I'll answer this. This webinar will be archived and available on our website by next week. All of them are recorded. So yes, this will be archived. Thank you for that question. Again, if anyone has any questions or anything that they'd like to share on the right-hand side, you could kindly type it in and I will read it and we'll answer. So let's, okay. So who is responsible to prevent bullying in a long-term care facility?
So by long-term care facility, are you talking about like a skilled nursing facility or just long-term care in general?
Skilled nursing facility.
Skilled nursing facility. I would say in a skilled nursing facility that the responsibility is going to fall primarily on the staff. And that is, what the state regulators are going to expect anyway. So having those policies and procedures in place that guide how can we create an environment of caring. And if you think about like resident to resident aggression in the nursing home, if you think about physical abuse in the nursing home, it's the staff is expected to have plans in place to prevent that from happening. So it's the same sort of thing with bullying, that it's going to be primarily up to the staff to manage the environment. And then keep in mind that typically people who bully are higher cognitive functioning. because you have to be able to remember who it is you don't like. You have to be able to develop a plan to, pick on them and those sorts of things. So those are people that you're going to be, residents that you're going to be able to work with to, do behavior modification and things like that. And often we mix up bullying and dementia-related behaviors. Dementia-related behaviors are a very different animal. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Another
and
question.
Then use your ombudsman too, to help around those issues.
Okay, another question. Do you have any suggestions for situations where family members of residents bully staff members?
Oh yes, that's a very, very challenging one too, where you have family members bullying staff and you have residents bullying staff. And often it's, at least in my experience, it's staff who are seen as different in some way and who are more vulnerable. So in my experience, it's been staff who are immigrants to this country, staff who are of color, staff for whom English is a second language tend to be picked on. So what I found the most helpful there is, again, to have the policies and procedures in place, and for those staff members to have the support of their administrator or their supervisor. What's most difficult for those people is, family member is picking on them or a resident is picking on them, and then administration sides with the family member. That's very, very disempowering. So having them have the support, and then training them in how to manage such things. That it's, they don't need to get in a fight with the family members, but there's ways to set limits. So how do you politely set limits with the family member, with the resident, as the case may be, and a system in place though where they can go to their supervisor and say, hey, this happened with me and a family member, can you help me? So that somebody at a higher level is also setting limits. And for the staff member who's picked on, that their intervention is very simple. It's like, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm going to take a little break now. I will come back and work with you later. That kind of thing, where there's a polite strategy to get out of the situation.
All right, thank you. Another question is, among individuals living with dementia, delirium can result in imagined bullying or abuse. How can non-trained people recognize and escalate as appropriate?
Oh yeah, that's a challenging one. I think that when you have somebody who is imagining that abuse is occurring, I mean, you want to investigate just like you would with any type of complaint or concern, and it's going to be around your documentation that so and so reported that this occurred, investigation happened, results are are not founded. So part of that is protecting yourself, protecting that facility. But in terms of intervention with the person, delirium needs to be treated, of course. But beyond that, assuring the person that you care and that they're in a safe place. And you never want to argue with somebody who is delirious or somebody who is delusional. You just wanted to say, what must be really frightening for you. I'm sorry you feel like that is happening. I'm going to do my best make things comfortable for you to, so those types of reassuring things you want to avoid, like, well, that's not happening. Of course, everybody here is kind, because then they see you as part of the bully. So provide that reassurance.
Thank you. Is there an ability to video surveillance, recognizing that this is not possible in private areas?
That I can't speak to, just because the regulations vary from state to state. So I would encourage you to speak with whoever is in your state who can help answer those types of questions, whether you can videotape or not as part of an anti-bullying campaign. It sort of raises red flags for me just about privacy and those types of things. But again, I would talk with your state regulators or whoever can answer that question, because there's variability there. I would think that if there's another way to monitor without doing it, that might be the best.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Those are all the. Oh no, these are great questions, and we do have a couple of minutes left. So if anyone has one last question that they'd like to ask or anything they'd like to share, please do so. As we're waiting, I just want a friendly reminder that there are handouts on the right-hand side. We have one more question that we'll be answering for today. What do you do when the person being bullied doesn't want you to step in and the bullying continues?
Well, that gets really, really tough. And it's sort of like that situation where somebody is being, physically abused or neglected or whatever, and they say, yeah, it's a problem, but I don't want you to do anything. I think it's the same thing, that we need to respect their autonomy, not to have intervention. But again, protect yourself, document that, person complained about XYZ, intervention offered, and they decline them. And I think don't leave it at that, but, follow up with the person, in another month or whatever, how things going, and, bring that up for conversation. Again, sometimes people need to be offered the intervention more than once. And then also to keep in mind, if you're doing community level, organizational level interventions, the pro-social activities and the civility training and the Upstander, those kinds of things, they don't require anyone's permission. So those organizational level interventions that help build a caring community are going to help everyone. And whether the person wants help or not, it doesn't come into play, if that makes sense. So that's one of the benefits of those types of interventions.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question?
No, I have, it's only 1:57, so 3 more minutes.
Yeah, we have, okay. So I believe the person who asked the question before, I don't know if this is a statement or just something that she's sharing. She wrote, it's peer-to-peer emotional bullying. I think she wanted to share that.
Yeah, that happens. And like, if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that the most common thing is that relational aggression. So we're not talking hitting and kicking and all those types of things, but it's like picking on each other emotionally. And you've heard the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And that's not true. That emotional picking on people is very, very hurtful. The woman I shared, who was called Fatso and oinking like a pig as she went by, I mean, that really, really affected her self-esteem. And that's, emotional peer-to-peer bullying. People pick on people. I remember a gentleman who was gay, constantly ridiculed for his sexual identity. And this is a person who'd been out of the closet and very engaged in that community. And then upon moving to assisted living, you felt like he'd gone back 30 years or whatever, being in an environment that didn't mix in who he was. So very, very difficult.
Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple of people who wrote how great of a speaker you were and really appreciated today's presentation. I want to thank everyone for participating and taking time out to listen to this very important topic. I especially want to thank you, Dr. Boniface, for sharing such a wealth of information. I certainly learned new information today, and I hope everyone joins us next time for our next Care Connection webinar. Again, I want to remind everybody that the handout from today's presentation is on the right-hand side under handouts. Again, I want to thank everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day and a good weekend. Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar.
Yes, bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.